The Monk and the Flowing River. Deep in a forest monastery, a young monk struggled with his meditation practice. No matter how hard he tried, his mind would wander constantly, thinking about past mistakes, worrying about future challenges, planning what he would eat for dinner, or wondering if he was progressing fast enough in his spiritual practice. Frustrated with his inability to find inner stillness, he sought guidance from the monastery's eldest teacher. "Master," the young monk said, "I have been meditating for months, but my mind is like a wild horse that refuses to be tamed. How can I achieve the peace that you and the other senior monks seem to possess so naturally?" The wise teacher smiled and invited the young monk to walk with him to a nearby river. They sat on the bank in silence for several minutes, watching the water flow steadily downstream. Fish swam beneath the surface, leaves floated past, and the current created gentle ripples and small whirlpools. "Tell me," the teacher finally said, "what do you see in this river?" The young monk described everything he observed: the movement of the water, the fish, the floating debris, the changing patterns on the surface. "Now," said the teacher, "try to stop the river from flowing." The young monk looked puzzled. "That's impossible, master. The river flows naturally. It's the river's nature to move." "Precisely," replied the teacher. "Your mind is like this river. Thoughts flow through it naturally. This is the mind's nature. You have been trying to dam up your thoughts, to force the river of your mind to stop flowing. This creates struggle and frustration." He continued, "Instead of trying to stop your thoughts, simply observe them as you observe this river. Watch them come and go without getting caught up in them. A thought about the past is like a leaf floating by. You can notice it without jumping into the water to chase it. A worry about the future is like a fish swimming past. You can see it without diving in to catch it." As they sat by the river, the teacher guided the young monk in a new way of meditating. Instead of fighting his thoughts, the monk learned to let them flow naturally while maintaining awareness of the present moment, the feeling of the ground beneath him, the sound of the water, the sensation of breathing. For the first time in months, the young monk experienced genuine peace. He realized that stillness didn't mean the absence of thoughts, but rather a quiet awareness that remained undisturbed by the mind's natural activity. The lesson. The flowing river teaches us that true mindfulness is not about controlling or stopping our thoughts, but about changing our relationship with them. Just as we can sit peacefully beside a flowing river without needing to control its movement, we can observe our thoughts without being carried away by them. This story shows us that the present moment is always available to us, regardless of how active our minds might be. When we stop struggling against our thoughts and instead learn to watch them with gentle awareness, we discover the peace that exists beneath the surface of mental activity. The gardener's daily practice. In the courtyard of an ancient temple, there lived an old gardener who tended the most beautiful garden anyone had ever seen. Visitors would come from great distances just to walk through his carefully cultivated paradise, where every flower seemed to bloom with extraordinary vibrancy and every tree grew with perfect grace. Many people asked the gardener for his secret, but his answers always seemed too simple to believe. One day, a successful businessman visited the temple, seeking relief from the stress and anxiety that had been consuming his life. He had tried many remedies, expensive vacations, luxurious possessions, even therapy, but nothing had brought him lasting peace. When he saw the gardener's extraordinary garden, he was convinced that this wise old man must possess some special knowledge that could help him. "Please," the businessman pleaded, "teach me your secret. How do you create such beauty and find such contentment in this simple work? I have wealth and success, but I feel empty inside. I'm constantly worried about my business, my competitors, my future. How can I find the peace that you seem to have?" The gardener looked up from the small seedling he was planting and smiled. "Would you like to help me with this little plant?" he asked. The businessman, expecting some profound philosophical teaching, was disappointed by such a mundane suggestion. Nevertheless, he knelt down beside the gardener. "First," said the gardener, "feel the soil in your hands. Notice its texture, its temperature, its earthy smell." As the businessman followed these instructions, he found his racing thoughts beginning to slow down. "Now, gently place the seedling in the hole we've made. Feel how delicate it is, how it trusts us to give it what it needs to grow." As they worked together, the gardener continued to guide the businessman's attention to each small action: the sensation of water flowing from the watering can, the way the sunlight felt on their faces, the gentle sound of bees moving among the flowers. After an hour of this simple work, the businessman realized something remarkable had happened. For the first time in years, his mind was completely quiet. He had been fully absorbed in the present moment, with no thoughts of business deals or future worries. "This is my secret," the gardener explained. "Every day I tend my garden with complete attention. I am fully present with each plant, each flower, each handful of soil. When you are completely here, in this moment, doing this one thing, worry cannot exist. The future and past disappear, and only this perfect now remains." The lesson. The gardener's practice demonstrates that mindfulness is not something we need to learn from complex teachings or expensive courses. It is available to us in every simple activity of daily life. When we bring complete attention to whatever we are doing, whether it's gardening, cooking, walking, or even washing dishes, we discover that the present moment is naturally peaceful. The businessman's transformation shows us that we don't need to change our entire life to find peace. We need to change the quality of attention we bring to our current life. This story teaches us that mindfulness is a practice that can be cultivated through any activity when we approach it with full presence and awareness. The master calligrapher's final painting. In ancient China, there lived a master calligrapher whose artwork was treasured throughout the empire. For 60 years, he had created magnificent scrolls with flowing characters that seemed to dance across the silk with life and beauty. Emperors and scholars competed to own his work, and he had trained many students who became famous artists in their own right. Now, at the age of 85, the master was creating his final piece. Word spread throughout the land that the great master would paint one last scroll before laying down his brush forever. People traveled from distant provinces to witness this historic moment. The master's studio was surrounded by admirers, students, and collectors, all hoping to see the culmination of a lifetime's artistic mastery. The master prepared his materials with the same careful attention he had given to his work for decades. He ground his ink with meditative precision, arranged his brushes with reverence, and hung a pristine white silk scroll. The crowd watched in hushed anticipation as he raised his brush and began to paint. His final creation was breathtaking, a simple bamboo grove with characters expressing the essence of impermanence and change. Each brushstroke flowed with the wisdom of decades, and the finished piece radiated a serene beauty that moved many observers to tears. When he completed the final character, the master set down his brush and smiled with deep satisfaction. Then, to everyone's shock and horror, he picked up a bowl of water and slowly poured it over the silk, watching as the ink began to run and blur. The crowd gasped, and several people cried out in dismay, "Master, what are you doing? You've destroyed your masterpiece." The old calligrapher looked at them with compassion and spoke gently, "My dear friends, you have missed the true masterpiece. The painting you saw was beautiful, yes, but it was not the masterpiece itself. The masterpiece was the 60 years of practice, the moments of deep concentration, the joy of creation, the wisdom gained through decades of devotion to my art. These things cannot be destroyed by water. He continued, if I had left this painting intact, you would have focused on preserving the result and forgotten the beauty of the process. You would have valued the object more than the journey that created it. But now you understand that the real treasure was always in the creating, not in what was created. As the water finished its work and the silk became blank again, the master bowed to his audience. This is my final teaching. True art, like life itself, is found in the moment of creation, not in trying to make that moment last forever. The lesson. The master calligrapher's final painting teaches us one of life's most profound truths about impermanence and what we should truly value. We often become so focused on preserving and protecting the results of our efforts that we forget to appreciate the journey itself. The master's deliberate destruction of his painting shows us that real fulfillment comes from the process of living, learning, growing, and creating, not from trying to make our achievements permanent. When we understand that everything in life is temporary, like the ink on silk, we can focus our attention on fully experiencing each moment rather than desperately trying to hold on to outcomes. This story encourages us to find meaning in the act of living itself rather than in what we accumulate or achieve along the way. Story 7. The Season of Letting Go. In a mountain village, there lived an elderly woman who had spent her entire life cultivating the most magnificent garden in the region. Every spring, her cherry trees would bloom with stunning pink blossoms that drew visitors from miles around. She had planted these trees as a young bride 50 years earlier, and they had become her pride and joy, marking the seasons of her life with their annual cycle of growth, flowering, fruiting, and rest. One autumn, the woman's grandson came to visit. He was a young man from the city, always busy with his career and technological gadgets. As they walked through the garden together, he noticed his grandmother carefully collecting the fallen cherry blossoms and seemed puzzled by her peaceful acceptance of their decline. "Grandmother," he said, "it makes me sad to see all these beautiful flowers dying and falling. If only there was a way to preserve them forever. Maybe we could press them in books or find some chemical treatment to keep them from fading. It seems such a waste to let all this beauty disappear." The grandmother smiled and continued gathering the fallen petals. "Come, help me collect these blossoms," she said. "But tell me, what makes them beautiful to you?" The grandson thought for a moment. Their color, their delicate shape, their sweet fragrance, everything about them is perfect. "And do you think they would be as beautiful if they bloomed all year long?" she asked. "Well, I suppose they might become ordinary if we saw them constantly," he admitted. The grandmother nodded wisely. "These cherry blossoms teach us something precious about beauty and life itself. They are so magnificent precisely because they are brief. When I was your age, I also wanted to hold on to everything beautiful forever. I pressed flowers in books, took countless photographs, tried to capture and preserve every perfect moment." She showed him a dried, colorless petal from an old book. "But look, when we try to preserve beauty by stopping its natural flow, we lose the very essence that made it beautiful in the first place. The real beauty of these blossoms is not just in how they look, but in their courage to bloom fully, knowing they will soon fall." As they continued walking, she explained, "Every season of my life has been like these cherry blossoms. My youth was beautiful, but it passed. My years as a young mother were wonderful, but they too passed. Now I am in the autumn of my life, and this season has its own unique beauty. If I had spent all my energy trying to prevent the earlier seasons from ending, I would have missed the gifts that each new season brought." She placed a fresh fallen blossom in her grandson's hand. "The secret is not to preserve the blossom, but to be fully present with it while it's here. When we accept that everything beautiful is temporary, we can love it even more deeply, without the anxiety of trying to make it last forever." The lesson: The season of letting go teaches us that impermanence is not the enemy of beauty. It is what makes beauty precious and meaningful. Like the cherry blossoms that are treasured precisely because they are brief, the experiences and relationships in our lives become more valuable when we understand they will not last forever. The grandmother's wisdom shows us that trying to preserve or cling to any particular phase of life prevents us from fully experiencing the unique gifts of our current season. When we embrace the natural cycles of growth and decline, blooming and letting go, we discover that each phase of life has its own irreplaceable beauty. This story encourages us to love deeply while holding lightly, appreciating the present moment without the desperate need to make it permanent. Story 8. The Beggar's Greatest Gift. In a prosperous city, there lived a wealthy merchant who prided himself on his charitable giving. Every week, he would distribute coins to the poor who gathered outside the temple, and he often spoke about his generosity to anyone who would listen. He believed that his donations made him a good person and that his wealth was a sign of his worthiness. One cold winter morning, as the merchant approached the temple with his usual bag of coins, he noticed an old beggar sitting quietly in the corner. Unlike the other poor people who would call out for alms, this man sat in peaceful silence, neither asking for anything nor acknowledging the merchant's presence. His clothes were little more than rags, and he appeared to own nothing except a small wooden bowl. Day after day, the merchant distributed coins to all the other beggars, but the silent old man never extended his hand or made any request. This began to irritate the merchant, who felt that his generosity was being ignored. Finally, his curiosity overcame his pride, and he approached the old man. "Why don't you ask for money like the others?" the merchant demanded. "Can't you see that I give generously to those in need?" The old beggar looked up with eyes that sparkled with an unexpected joy. "I can see that you give with a good heart," he replied gently, "but I have nothing to offer you in return, so I cannot accept your coins." The merchant laughed. "What could a beggar possibly offer me? I have everything I need: a fine house, successful business, respect in the community. What could you give that I don't already have?" The old man smiled. "I could teach you the secret of true wealth, but only if you're willing to receive such a gift." Intrigued despite himself, the merchant sat down beside the beggar. "Very well, teach me this secret." The old man reached into his tattered robe and pulled out a small piece of stale bread. "This is my lunch," he said, "and I would like to share it with you." He carefully broke the bread in half and offered the larger piece to the merchant. The merchant was about to refuse. The bread looked dry and unappetizing, but something in the old man's expression stopped him. He accepted the bread and took a bite. Somehow, sharing this simple meal with the beggar felt more satisfying than any of the elaborate feasts he regularly enjoyed. "This is the secret," the old man explained. "True wealth is not in how much you can give away, but in how willing you are to share what little you have. When you give from abundance, you lose nothing and gain only pride. When I share my only piece of bread, I give everything, and in doing so, I discover that I have more than enough." The merchant sat in stunned silence, realizing that despite all his charitable giving, he had never experienced the pure joy that radiated from this beggar who owned almost nothing. For the first time, he understood the difference between giving to feel good about himself and giving from genuine love. From that day forward, the merchant's approach to generosity completely changed. He began to give not just money, but time, attention, and genuine care. He learned to receive gifts from others, recognizing that true compassion flows both ways. The lesson. The beggar's greatest gift teaches us that authentic generosity comes not from how much we have to give, but from the spirit in which we give. The old beggar, who had almost nothing material, was able to offer something more valuable than money, the experience of pure, selfless sharing. His willingness to give away half of his only meal demonstrates that true wealth lies in our capacity for love and connection, not in our accumulations. This story shows us that genuine compassion involves both giving and receiving with an open heart, recognizing that every person we encounter has something valuable to offer, regardless of their material circumstances. The merchant's transformation reminds us that the greatest gift we can give others is our authentic presence and care, while the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the humility to learn from everyone we meet. Story 9. The Healer's Gentle Touch. In a remote mountain village, there lived a humble healer who had dedicated her life to caring for the sick and suffering. Unlike the physicians in the larger towns who relied heavily on expensive medicines and complex treatments, this woman worked primarily with herbs, gentle touch, and deep listening. People traveled great distances to seek her help, not just for her healing skills, but for the extraordinary sense of peace they felt in her presence. One day, a wealthy lord arrived at the village in great distress. His young daughter had fallen gravely ill, and despite consulting with the most renowned doctors in the kingdom and spending vast amounts of money on treatments, her condition continued to worsen. The physicians had declared her case hopeless, but the desperate father had heard stories about the mountain healer and decided to make one final attempt to save his child. The lord's entourage created quite a commotion in the small village: elaborate carriages, dozens of servants, guards in shining armor, and chests full of gold coins. The Lord himself was accustomed to being treated with great ceremony and deference wherever he went. When he reached the healer's simple hut, he was shocked by its modest appearance. "Are you the famous healer?" he asked skeptically. "I expected someone more." "Impressive. I need the very best treatment for my daughter. Money is no object. What is your fee?" The humble woman looked at the sick child, who was pale and barely conscious in her father's arms. Without saying a word about payment, she gently took the girl and laid her on a simple mat. She began by simply placing her hands softly on the child's forehead, closing her eyes in deep concentration. "What are you doing?" the Lord demanded impatiently. "Shouldn't you be giving her medicine? Where are your instruments? How can such simple actions help my daughter?" The healer opened her eyes and spoke softly. "Sir, your daughter is indeed very sick, but her greatest illness is not in her body, it is in her heart. She is carrying a tremendous burden of fear and sadness. Before any medicine can help her body heal, we must first heal her spirit." She continued to work with the child, speaking to her in gentle whispers, stroking her hair, and radiating a sense of complete love and acceptance. Gradually, the girl's breathing became easier, and some color returned to her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, she opened her eyes and smiled. "How did you do that?" the amazed Lord asked. "My physicians tried everything, but nothing worked. What is your secret?" The healer smiled. "I have no secret remedies or magical powers. I simply offer what every person needs most when they are suffering: the feeling that they are completely loved and accepted exactly as they are. Your daughter was drowning in fear, and I threw her a rope of compassion. Sometimes that is the most powerful medicine of all." The Lord reached for his purse, ready to pay any amount for this miraculous cure, but the healer gently declined. "The only payment I need is for you to carry this same loving presence into your own family. Treat your daughter with the same gentle care I have shown her, and she will continue to heal." The lesson. The healer's gentle touch demonstrates that the most powerful form of compassion is often the simplest, offering our complete presence and unconditional love to those who are suffering. While technical knowledge and resources have their place, this story reminds us that what people need most when they are in pain is the feeling that someone truly sees them, accepts them, and cares about their well-being. The healer's wisdom shows us that effective compassion requires us to address not just the obvious symptoms of suffering, but the deeper emotional and spiritual needs that underlie them. Her refusal to accept payment and her instruction for the Father to continue the healing through his own loving presence teaches us that true compassion is not a transaction, but a way of being that we can cultivate and share with everyone around us. Story 10. The Teacher Who Forgot Everything. In a prestigious monastery renowned for its vast library and scholarly reputation, an elderly teacher lived who was revered throughout the land for his encyclopedic knowledge of Buddhist texts. For 50 years, he had memorized thousands of sutras, written numerous commentaries, and taught countless students who had gone on to become respected masters themselves. Pilgrims would travel for months to hear him recite the ancient teachings with perfect accuracy. One morning, the old teacher awoke to discover that something extraordinary had happened during the night. He could no longer remember any of the sacred texts that had defined his entire adult life. The words that had been as familiar to him as his breathing had vanished from his mind. At first he was profoundly disturbed and tried frantically to recall even the simplest verses he had known by heart for decades. Panicking, he called his most devoted student. "Something terrible has happened," he confessed. "I can no longer remember the teachings. All the knowledge I have spent my life accumulating is gone. How can I continue to be a teacher when I have forgotten everything I was supposed to know?" The student was shocked. "Master, perhaps this is temporary. Let me help you review the texts. Surely your memory will return." However, as the days passed, it became clear that the teacher's vast scholarly knowledge had truly vanished. The other monks began to whisper among themselves. How could someone who had forgotten the teachings continue to guide others? Some suggested that the old teacher should retire, acknowledging that his usefulness had come to an end. However, something unexpected began to happen. Students who came to the teacher found that their conversations with him had become more helpful than ever before. Without the ability to quote elaborate texts or give complex explanations, the teacher could only speak from his direct experience and offer simple, heartfelt responses to their questions. A young monk came to him struggling with meditation, and instead of reciting formal instructions, the teacher said, "Sit with me and breathe." That's all. The profound simplicity of this guidance gave the student exactly what he needed. Another visitor came seeking advice about dealing with anger, and the teacher, no longer able to quote sophisticated philosophical arguments, shared, "When I feel angry now, I notice it. Feel it completely, and then watch it fade away like a cloud. Nothing more is needed." Word spread that the teacher who forgot everything had somehow become wiser than ever. People began to understand that his decades of study had not been wasted. They had been preparing him for this moment when he could finally teach from pure wisdom rather than from accumulated knowledge. The old teacher himself came to realize that losing his memory had been the greatest gift he could have received. "For 50 years, he told his student, "I was carrying around thousands of answers, but I had forgotten how to be present with the questions simply. Now that my mind is empty of all those words, there is finally room for understanding." The lesson, the teacher who forgot everything, illustrates the profound difference between accumulated knowledge and living wisdom. While studying and learning are valuable parts of any spiritual journey, this story reminds us that accurate understanding often comes not from collecting more information, but from letting go of our attachments to being knowledgeable. The teacher's loss of memory became his liberation because it forced him to respond to each situation freshly, without the filter of preconceived ideas or the burden of maintaining his reputation as a scholar. This TG's reputation brine end of Kacha.